Good morning, class. I hope we're all well. So, for today, we'll just start off with looking at four aims of the League of Nations, one of which was to stop war, according to Article 10 of the Covenant, which is basically about collective security. The second was to improve people's lives and jobs, and it would also encourage cooperation in trade and also through economic and social agencies. And number three of the aims of the League of Nations was disarmament of its members and just the world at large. And the fourth was to enforce the Treaty of Versailles. And then we'll move on to the membership of the League of Nations. And we see that initially at the start, 42 countries joined. And by the 1930s, this number had risen to 60 countries. In May 1920, the US Senate voted against Versailles, and we also noticed that the USSR did not join the League. And in 1919, it actually set up the Comintern so as to cause revolution. And Germany was also not allowed to join the League as punishment because of causing World War One. And we'll notice that the leading members of the League were Britain and France, helped by Japan and Italy. And then we'll quickly move on to the structure of the League of Nations. So the League of Nations was made up of the Secretariat. There was also the Council, the Assembly, as well as the committees. And we'll just quickly go into each of these four. So the Secretariat was supposed to coordinate the different functions of the League. Unfortunately, there were too few secretaries to do the work, and as such, it was slow and inefficient. And then we move on to the Council, where we see that the council met 4 to 5 times a year, and there were five permanent members. This was Britain, France, Italy, Japan, and Germany, and each of these countries had veto power. And then when we move on to the assembly, this was basically the league's main meeting, and it was held once a year, and decisions were made only by a unanimous vote. Then we move on to the committees, where we see that there was the Court of International Justice, the Health Committee, the International Labour Organization, Refugees Committee, and the Mandates Commission. And then there was also the Slavery Commission, which was also the Conference of Ambassadors, though this was not really a part of the League's organization. And then from there, we'll go to three strengths of the League. And we see that the League was set up by the Treaty of Versailles, and that it had universal membership, and all its members had signed the covenant, promising to support the League. And some of the means of influence that the League had was through the covenant, where we see 26 promises that each member signed and promised to follow. Then there was also moral condemnation through public opinion, arbitration by acting as a referee, sanctions, which was to refuse to trade with a specific country, military force, where if need be, they would send an army. And then there was also community of power, which was acting together. And then following that, we'll quickly move on to the 6 successes of the League in 1920s. And one was in Silesia in 1921, where Germany and Poland managed to agree to partition after a plebiscite because they were having disputes as to where Silesia belonged, as to which country Silesia belonged to. And the second success of the League was with the Åland Islands in 1921, where it was said that the islands should belong to Finland. This was because Sweden and Finland were having disputes as to where the island belonged to, and Sweden and Finland did agree with the decision of the League of Nations. And number three, we have Mosul in 1924, where we see the Turks were demanding Mosul in Iraq as theirs. And we find that the League actually supported Iraq, and Turkey did agree with the League eventually. And then number four, we have Bulgaria in 1925, where we see that Greece invaded Bulgaria, but when Bulgaria appealed to the League of Nations, Greece decided to withdraw. Greece withdrew from Bulgaria. And then one of the successes of the League was that we'll just go through quickly some of the other successes of the League. We see that 400,000 prisoners of war were repatriated, and we'll find that in 1922, in Turkey, refugee camps were set up. Then we also noticed that leprosy and drug companies ended up closing down. And then there was also the attack of slave owners in Sierra Leone and Burma. And then we also see that the League gave economic advice to Austria and Hungary. And then the sixth success of the League that we look at is the Kelland-Briand Pact of 1928, which was signed by 23 nations and supported by 65. And this pact sought to outlaw war. Then we'll quickly go to six failures of the League in the 1920s. So the first one was in Vilna in 1920, where we find that Poland refused the League's orders to withdraw from Vilna. The second failure of the League in the 1920s was with regards to the invasion of Rouen in 1923 by France. The League was not even consulted when the invasion was taking place, and Britain disagreed with the League's decision. In the third failure of the League was in 1923 in Memel, where we find that the League told Lithuania to leave, but the Conference of Ambassadors agreed with Lithuania's decision. And the fourth failure that we look at is with regards to Corfu in 1923, where General Tallini was murdered, and as such, Italy occupied Corfu. So the Conference of Ambassadors overruled the League's orders for Mussolini to leave, and we find that Greece was forced to pay compensation to Italy. So the fifth, we'll look at just a few failures of the League was with regards to Washington. And then we have the 1921 Dawes Plan. Then we also have the 1924 Locarno Pact, the 1925 Geneva Protocol, and then in 1924, with regards to supporting the League of Nations, this failed because the League refused to sign it. This was the Geneva Protocol of 1924. And the sixth failure of the League was with regards to disarmament. So Britain objected to the 1923 conference, and then the 1932 and 1934 conference was wrecked when Hitler demanded parity with France. And we know that France ended up refusing to disarm, and they had actually requested to have at least 8 years before they could begin disarmament.